Welcome to the Expert Series, where we explore the cutting-edge issues shaping national security and defense. It's Wednesday, November 20th, 2024, and I'm Josh Mullen, Director of Research and Analysis for the Institute. In today's episode, to mark the 1000th day of the war in Ukraine, we'll be speaking with Ukrainian Ambassador to Canada, Yulia Kovaliv. She'll discuss the evolution of the conflict, Ukraine's path to victory, navigating a shifting NATO alliance, and the return of President Donald Trump, as well as Canada-Ukraine relations. This is the Expert Series.
In this special episode marking the 1000th day of Russia's full-scale invasion of Ukraine, we're honored to be joined by Ambassador Yulia Kovaliv, Ukraine's ambassador to Canada. Since her appointment in 2022, Ambassador Kovaliv has been a tireless advocate for Ukraine, working to strengthen the crucial partnership between Canada and Ukraine. Today, she'll be sharing some unique perspectives with us on the evolving dynamics of the conflict, the resilience of the Ukrainian people, and the vital role Canada continues to play in supporting Ukraine's fight in the Russo-Ukrainian war. So, Ambassador Kovaliv, it's a pleasure and an honor to have you with us today. As we mark 1,000 days of this conflict, the world has witnessed the incredible resilience of the Ukrainian people. So to start, I'd like to ask, what does this milestone represent for Ukraine? And from your perspective, how has this conflict evolved since those early days? And what are the most pressing strategic challenges you think Ukraine now faces?
Thank you. Thank you for having me today on this day when we all commemorate 1,000 days from the start of the Russian full-scale invasion. And I think it's very right to name the things as they are. 1,000 days ago, Russian tanks crossed the border of the sovereign country, Ukraine. 1,000 days ago, Russian missiles hit Ukrainian infrastructure, Ukrainian cities across all of the country. The peaceful country who was building our way to EU, our way to NATO, a democratic country, which was indeed a challenge to Russia itself. So for this 100 days, coming back to the situation on the February 24th, 2022, I think it's important to realize several things. First is that all the Western policy towards Russia failed, because the policies that have been built for decades to, build relations, economic relations, investment, trade relations with Russia, with kind of the naive beliefs that there could be at some point of time that Russia will become a democratic country, just bluntly failed. But the signals, and very clear signals, of who Russia is and what Russian imperial ambitions are, were clearly seen 10 years ago, when Russia illegally occupied Crimea, when Russia occupied part of Donetsk and Luhansk region, when Russian tanks crossed border of Georgia and occupied part of the Georgia, when Russia was committing the horrific crimes supporting the Syria atrocities. And that's where the world, just were deep concerned. And to realize how the mindset of these authoritarian regimes and dictator mindset is working, that's how they treated it as the green light to go further. For 10 years after illegal occupation of Crimea and part of Eastern Ukrainian territory, we have been saying that Russia won't stop there. Russia will go further. And actually what we saw just 1,000 days ago. The other reality is that most of the Western analysis failed, because those were, predicting that Ukraine, but not only Western, actually international, I would say, analytics failed, because they predicted that Ukraine will fall down in days and weeks. And calculating, how that will fall down, and even proposing, Ukrainian government to find a safe place somewhere in Europe. On the other hand, I think we have already strategically won, because for for this 1,000 days, we continued to fight. We managed to liberate a lot of Ukrainian territories. The country is now a candidate to EU membership. The incredible resilience of Ukrainian people, of Ukrainian institutions that continue to work during the wartime, the resilience of our critical infrastructure, the resilience of energy sector. It's altogether is a remarkable example of what really, democracy is and what a real will of people can do. Because if we all remember back then, there were these fears that Russia was so-called second biggest army in the world, member of Security Council, nuclear power. Look where we are now. We are fighting, and none of those predictions that were back in February 2022 were coming true.
Ambassador Kovaliv, thanks for setting the scene with that explanation and answer to my first question. That's very helpful for setting up the discussion. From there, I'd like to ask, what should victory realistically mean for Ukraine and its allies? What does it look like? And how can Ukrainian leadership continue communicating this vision in order to maintain unity and commitment among international supporters?
I think, in the question itself, when you're asking about realistic victory, you're trying to, if I would say, put the tone on of some, maybe the compromise. But the reality is that if we want to ensure that we are living in a rule-based order, if we want to ensure that both countries who are big and small in terms of their territory, in terms of strong military powers, and those who don't have great military capabilities, those who are economically developed and those who are emerging economies continue to live peacefully together, sharing borders, that's where Ukrainian victory and the restoration of our sovereign borders is important. Another important pillar for Ukraine's victory is to ensure that there will be security and stability for the decades ahead. We also saw it, as I mentioned, after Russia occupied Crimea. The important point of Ukraine's victory is to ensure that Russia will never repeat its aggression again. And that's why it's important and the realistic ensuring of this security state and stability, not only for European region, but in a broader context, is Ukraine's membership in NATO. And why I'm specifically stressing on this? Because we also look on the history. We can start with 1938, with the Munich Agreement, which was the attempt to appease aggressor, and we also learned from the history where it all went. We also saw Budapest Memorandum. It's when Ukraine, having the third biggest nuclear weapon stock in the world, refused from these nuclear weapons and instead got so-called Budapest Memorandum, where the four countries, including Russia, guaranteed Ukraine's sovereignty, territorial integrity. We also learned the lesson where it led later. We also saw back in 2014, actually the attempts for the ceasefire, where Russia just armed and then in 2022 attacked Ukraine. So we always need to remind ourselves that those negative and tragic examples of the very dangerous decisions will not repeat again. The third important thing is in the victory plan is the justice. Since the start of the full-scale invasion, Russia committed over 130,000 war crimes. Sex violence became a part of the warfare. Torture, inhuman treatment of people, including civilians, the illegal deportation of Ukrainian children. These all are the crimes which need to be punished. And on the top of it, the core crime, which is the crime of aggression, need to be investigated, and those involved, including Putin and his close circle, need to be brought to justice, because that will serve an important lesson for other dictators not to repeat it in any part of the world again. The fourth important thing is the Ukraine's rebuilding. Overall losses of Ukrainian economy, infrastructure, housing, energy system already exceed $400 billion. And it's Russia that need to pay for all of these damages. So that's why the important point is actually seizing Russian sovereign assets, which are now frozen in many of the Western capitals, and repurpose it for Ukraine's rebuilding.
Well, thank you, Ambassador Kovaliv. I'd like to zoom out here for a moment and discuss the broader context. Obviously, the war in Ukraine, as started by Russia, directly impacts Ukraine and Ukrainians, but it also has broader global and regional security implications. Could we discuss perhaps the impact on European security of a weakened Ukraine, or on global security, and could we maybe discuss the importance of continued Western support for Ukraine in this conflict?
Of course. And look what's happening now. It's not only Russia who is now physically fighting on the front line. We have 11,000 of North Korean troops who are currently present in Russia. This is unprecedented escalation from the Russian side. And we also, as President Zelensky just today said, that the number of North Korean troops could increase up to 100,000. What does it mean? It does mean that the security and stability for in the Pacific region is becoming a challenge, because what North Korea is getting from it is their army, their troops will be trained in the modern warfare. What was the last, we need to ask ourselves, what was the last big conventional war where all of the Western allies had the experience? It was Korean War. And what is now happening in Ukraine with Russian full-scale invasion is the big conventional war, plus the war where new technology is taking a big role. Whether it's the electronic warfare, whether it's the drones and unmanned system of the different types, whether it's use of AI in the battlefield. So the danger for in the Pacific is that North Korean troops are getting that experience from the real battlefield. Another danger is, in a more broader context, more close allies of that axe of evil, Russia, Iran, and North Korea, who are not only like supporting each other, like North Korea sending millions of artillery shells to Russia, like Iran, who is sending their Shahed drones to Russia and training Russian troops. But also the question we need to ask ourselves, and it's a very serious question, on what are those countries are getting from Russia instead. And it means that there are parts of the world like Middle East, like in the Pacific, which are already connecting the dots of insecurity and the risks with their support of Russia in this war. And of course, it increases the risk of all of the Western democracies if that axe of evil could prevail, which definitely they will not.
Ambassador Kovaliv, thank you. For the next few moments, I'm hoping we can discuss more the Canadian-Ukrainian relationship, especially as it pertains to the ongoing conflict. So I'd like to ask, how does Ukraine see Canada as a partner and ally amidst this war, and how impactful have Canada's aid packages and support been to address Ukraine's defense needs?
Indeed, Canada is one of our strong and important partners. Uh, since the very start of Ukraine's independence, Canada played an important historic role in helping, to build Ukraine as the independent democratic country. And today, when we are fighting for our country, Canada is standing shoulder to shoulder with us in the support. Canada is playing an important role with several of the fields. With the military support, Canada was the first country to start training of Ukrainian soldiers by the NATO standards back in 2015. It's already played an important role because when the full-scale invasion started, over 30,000 of Ukrainian troops have been trained by Canadian program Unifier and were ready and well trained to withstand Russian aggression. Now Canada continues this training together with UK and other allies with the joint program Interflex, both in UK, in Latvia, and Poland, and it depends also on our current demands on a different types of this training, which is important because with the new conscription, was the additional challenges that the war is bringing for us. This training is valuable for us, but also what we understand it's very valuable for Canadian forces, which are learning through training and getting the feedback from Ukrainian soldiers, from Ukrainian commanders on the reality of the biggest conventional war since the Second World War in the European continent. Canada is also helping us to build capabilities. Canada joined 3 coalitions, the Coalition for Fighter Jets, where Canada helped us to train Ukrainian pilots. Canada joined the Armored Vehicles Coalition, where Canada is helping by Canadian-produced armored vehicles to help us to build this capability. And what is also important, and I think strategic, is Canada joined the Drone Coalition. Why I'm saying that it is strategic, because today drones are playing, and when I'm saying drones, is a great number of different unmanned systems, whether it's the maritime drones or the drones, which are making the operations on the surface, or the flying drones of the different types. They are playing today a new role on the battlefield. For example, when Ukraine was critically feeling lack of artillery shells, there were tens of kilometers on the front line where our soldiers were keeping those lines by mostly using only drones. So by joining today, Ukraine also is producing. This year, we are expecting to produce around 1 million of drones. In your cases, it's the cooperation with many of the Western companies. What Ukraine is offering is not only, to be able to produce these drones, but to be able quickly test them on a real battlefield, test them against the electronic warfare, Russian electronic warfare, so that these drones will be really worth to further development, deployment for different tactical needs in Ukraine and in different other parts of the world. So we see that cooperation in the drone technology as the mixture of helping us with our urgent needs, but also was the big potential of building the joint defense industry capabilities and innovations for the years and decades ahead.
Well, thank you, Ambassador Kovaliv. Obviously, a huge news item over the past few weeks was the re-election of President Donald Trump. Donald Trump said a lot of things about NATO and the war in Ukraine. We obviously know that he's a critic of NATO, and he's discussed his approach to Ukraine. Although we can't predict what's next, what strategies could Ukraine employ potentially to maintain a strong coalition of support from Western allies in the face of fluctuating or changing U.S. support? And how do you think the election of Donald Trump might influence the trajectory of the conflict, if at all?
So first, I would like to say that I think that's very time to realize that indeed the defense spendings need to be ramped up. And indeed, the minimum threshold of 2% is just the minimum, because the world is changing. The security challenges which all of us democracies and North Atlantic Alliance is facing requires strong capabilities to deter. So all of the NATO members should be very serious, and many of them show this leadership in significantly exceeding the threshold of 2%, because it's not the time when we should be naive that the world is that we saw it the decade post Second World War. It's rapidly changing. The adversaries are becoming stronger, and the democracies need to be better armed to be protected and to deter those risks. So we see it's happening in many countries. We see also the increase of defense spendings and in the Indo-Pacific region, whether it's Japan, whether it's South Korea, whether it's many of the European allies. We also realize that the defense industries were not ready to quickly ramp up. And as we started to talk back at the end of 2022, that the other challenge that we will all face together is the capacity and capability to produce, whether we are talking about artillery shells, whether we are talking about artillery itself, whether we are talking about tanks, armored vehicles, air defense system, missiles for them. This is the time when there need to be a very strong coordination between the governments, between the government commitments to get to this 2% at least, and the defense sector that need to be able to quickly ramp up the productions. We are building it from ourselves. We are significantly investing in Ukraine defense sector, whether it's, I mentioned, the drone production, whether it's the artillery production, the armored vehicles production. We understand that the stronger our own defense sector will be, the more sustainable we will be in terms of our resilience and the supply of the those needed weapons for our armed forces. Of course, we also, what is important, we started to build this long-term predictability with our partners, building the long-term programs for support of Ukraine, which does not end, from budget year to budget year, which are multi-year program, which is also very helpful for the defense industry to plan, to scale up their production, but it also creates the predictability for Ukraine from our friends and allies. And Canada is among the good example of having now the 5-year program to support Ukraine, which was a part of the agreement on security cooperation that was signed in February this year in Kyiv by Prime Minister Trudeau and President Zelensky. So these are important things. Another important thing is the decision that G7 countries made this year of using the 50 billion of the interest on Russia's frozen sovereign assets, and to use this as the funding for Ukraine, both to support the budget needs, but also to support the military procurement needed. So the implementation of this decision will also allow to ensure that there is additional funding, both for the military needs and for the still to help us on the financial side as the country and the economy is suffering from the war.
Well, Ambassador Kovaliv, I really appreciate your time today. I noticed that we are getting near the end of our session together. But before we wrap up, I'm wondering if you have any parting words, whether that's for Canadians, Canadian policymakers, or if there's any points you'd like to really hit home for the audience or reiterate before we wrap up today.
I really want to thank you on this day when we and me personally, when I remember how the war started and what was the first ever sound of the missile I've heard in my life. I really want to thank you, the government of Canada, Canadian people, for the solidarity and support of Ukraine. And sometimes I'm hearing that, there is the risk that probably West could be tired about Ukraine. But that for me is a very strange notion, because we are fighting. Our people are every day fighting both on the front line, but also living in Ukrainian cities where just 2 days ago, Putin sent 210 missiles and drones over the night. So there is no room for us to be tired, and there is important lessons we learned from the history. The peace which Ukraine wants and all Ukrainians really want. We didn't start this war, but the peace through strength should be our joint strategy to really achieve this just and lasting peace for Ukraine, for Europe, and for all of the democracies.
Ambassador Kovaliv, thanks for your time on this 1000th day of the war in Ukraine. We wish our Ukrainian partners and allies all the best, and we appreciate your role in continually advocating for your country and for your people. And we hope that Canada and Ukraine continue to be good partners during this conflict and well after as well. So really appreciate your time, and thank you for providing your thought leadership and expertise today.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thanks for tuning in. That's all for this week's episode of the CDA Institute Expert Series. Join us next week, and if you'd like to learn more about the CDA Institute, visit our website at www.cdainstitute.ca. Thanks.